Hello, and welcome to the Ground and Grow podcast. I am your host, Kayla Estenson Williams. This is the second podcast I'm recording today because I am taking off. My family, we celebrate Christmas, so I'm taking off the week of Christmas and the week of New Year's. So I just wanted to get these podcast recordings done, scheduled, so that I just do not have to do too much work on the background stuff on my break. So second podcast recording today, but you will just hear it. I believe it'll be right before New Year's. So if you celebrated anything last week, I hope you had a nice holiday, and I hope your New Year is going well, or your New Year's plans are going well. And yeah, I think it can be. I think I probably have a podcast episode from last year talking about like New Year's intentions and all of that. But for me, I like to reflect at this time of year. It's also around the time of my birthday. My birthday is at the end of December. And so it just feels like a really nice time for me to reflect, like, hey, how do I feel about this last year? What are some things that went really well, or that I'm really grateful for, or that I feel really proud of? And what things do I want to connect into next year? Sometimes I'll pick like a word of the year. I'm still kind of figuring out what that is. But yeah, it's a fun time for me to reflect. So if it's a fun time for you to reflect, awesome. I typically don't recommend like super strict like New Year's resolutions or major change things, unless that's just like how you get motivated and that really works for you. Awesome. But typically for myself with clients, I'll kind of, if reflecting on the New Year's their jam, I might recommend like picking some intentions or things that you want to connect to, or maybe a word that you want to remind yourself of throughout the year. You get to change it if you need to, but I think bringing it down to just like, oh yeah, how do I want to show up for myself in this year, rather than like, I have to do this change and this like result has to be made kind of thing. So that's kind of how I roll. You can roll however you want, but that's just my 2 cents, I suppose. But yeah, so no major life updates since I shared a little bit of my life in the last episode. So today maybe will be a little shorter episode. I don't know. But today we will get into our story that I'm going to share that I typically find on Reddit. This one I found on the pregnant subreddit. And so let's get into it. So the title of this one is MIL, mother-in-law, wants to go to my first prenatal appointment. How do I let her down gently? Some of us have that spicy type of mother-in-law, the narcissistic ones, or maybe the too involved ones. I have a variety of reasons that I don't want her there. The biggest one is that she likes to berate her son any chance she gets, and it's very stressful. But there's plenty of other reasons too. For those of you who have a spicy mother-in-law, that's what I call them, how do you let them down gently? How do you say no to the involvement of prenatal care? So yeah, I think this, what I share with clients a lot of the time is like, this is a really great time for working on boundaries in your relationship and in your family dynamic, because you're going to need them in new ways. I feel very fortunate. Maybe I'll do a little personal share here, right? Like, I feel very fortunate that both with my family as well as my husband's family, like there's no like a spicy mother-in-law or anything. In fact, my mother-in-law is so sweet and respectful of our boundaries and like asks what we need. And so if you are a potential, like, are a mother-in-law with a new grandbaby on the way, be like my mother-in-law, Denise, if you're listening, hi. And, I don't think she didn't ask to come. She just kind of said, like, let me know what you need. And it was really fun because my daughter was born right before my mother-in-law's birthday. So we were able to have her come and visit baby on her birthday, which was exciting. And it wasn't something I felt stressed about because there wasn't pressure for her. Like, I knew that if we were feeling overwhelmed with things, like for both of our families, it wouldn't have been a big deal to say, we're not going to have visitors here. We'll see you when we get home. But because things were going pretty smooth, as smooth as they could be, and we felt good. And then our, parents were very sweet and loving. We were able to have my mom come and my mother-in-law come. This was in the midst of kind of the pandemic restrictions. So we could only have like 2 visitors, one including my husband. So we could only have one person, which personally I kind of liked having that boundary already in place for us, because I'm personally not someone who would have liked to have a bunch of visitors. I think I would have felt a little overstimulated, overwhelmed. I might have had a hard time communicating that I'm done having visitors. So it worked out well. That the boundary was already in place. But if it wasn't, I think that would have been something that I would have really made sure to communicate. So, like I was saying, when you're pregnant, when you're growing your family, it's a really nice time for you and your partner to really figure out what kind of boundary things do we need to bring in, because it can bring up big emotions in families, right? Like, even if they have really great intentions, they might want to be super involved. They might have their own stuff showing up and feel like they need to be important in the process, which isn't always intentional, but sometimes it's like, oh, like, please do your own work, mom. But all that to say, it's a great time to work on boundaries. And with this, so when it's like boundaries with the in-laws, what I often recommend and work on with clients is having the partner who like is, directly related to them. So in this case, it sounds like husband's family, husband's mom. That is going to be the person communicating these boundaries, right? Like, both of you might be upholding them and reiterating them, but whoever's like immediate family it is kind of the one we want to be communicating those boundaries, because that's their family. That's kind of their responsibility. That's their stuff. And it can feel really messy and really complicated, especially if there is some like, I think on social media, we all see, and I know some people experience, right? Like having some kind of toxic in-law relationships, right? Where maybe in-laws aren't as accepting of the new partner, or like, I don't know, want to be more important than the new partner or whatever, right? Like sometimes there can be messiness there. So if the partner is the one communicating these hard boundaries, that's just going to add more tension in that relationship. So we really want it to be coming from the partner who is immediately related to them. So in this situation, husband's mom. And it sounds like that's going to be tough, right? Because it looks like in this post that mother-in-law kind of berates her son and maybe isn't the kindest. And that's like one of the most challenging things in that relationship. And so, I'm sure there's some history, some tough stuff behind it. And if this were my client, I would probably say, like, let's bring in the radical acceptance skill of like, this is going to be a long-term process, right? Like working to possibly get that relationship to be where you want it to be, where I'm guessing the goals are like, have mother-in-law be more respectful and kind, more kind of attuned with boundaries and needs, and just like more supportive, right? Like there's probably a lot of big things that maybe need to change, based on this like little post that I read. I don't know, but if that was the case, right, like I might talk with them as my clients and say like, okay, like let's radically accept this might be a long road and you might never get where you want to be. But like, if you're trying this, if you're like, okay, right now we're growing our family, this is a time that I really want to work on this. One, to protect our peace and our space throughout these difficult life transitions. But two, because like this is the time that I want to kind of shift that and model this for my family of creation that I'm growing. Like I want to have healthier dynamics in my family system, or at the bare minimum, I want to be showing up as skillfully as I can, right? Which I don't know the history, obviously, from this small blurb, but maybe if mom berates son a lot, like possibly he maybe has a hard time speaking up about that, standing up for himself, expressing some of those things that he needs from his mom. So that might be a skill to kind of work on. And while in the grand scheme of things, it might be shifting a lot of those relationship dynamics in the here and now. It's like, okay, we got to figure out how to hold these boundaries of mother-in-law not coming to these prenatal appointments. Like, some people would love that, right? Like, and if you're listening and you're like, I would love that, right? I would love my mom or my mother-in-law to come to these appointments. Awesome. Great. I know personally that would have been super overwhelming. I would not have been excited about that. And it's not to say that I wouldn't be excited to share those things with my family. I always was, right? Like after my appointments, I would text everyone the picture and the updates and all of that. So I was excited for them to be a part of it, but I wanted that to be an experience for me and my husband in those moments. I had to do a lot of scans towards the end of the pregnancy. So sometimes it was just me, but like I wouldn't have really wanted someone else being there, right? Kind of in the family, because it's like I want to process it first before I share that outwards. Or just be in that moment first, right? Like it's okay, even if you love your extended family so much, it's okay to like want them to be the second tier of gathering that information. And so that sounds like the primary thing, right? Like the big goal, like the long-term thing to work on might be shifting those relationship dynamics. But like, let's put that stuff on pause a little bit because we can only work with one topic at a time. If you call up mom and, to this husband, if you call up mom and you share all the things that need to change, that's going to be overwhelming. That conversation is going to get messy real fast. So bring it down to one topic. A couple episodes ago, I had my Dear Man episode. So if you're like, how do I do that? How do I communicate these things? Listen to that Dear Man episode. This is what I would recommend this guy do with his mom is like, do a Dear Man, just a communication skill to like communicate a boundary or a need and stick to this one topic, right? So it sounds like this first topic is going to be involvement in these prenatal appointments. It sounds like the goal of this is going to be really letting her know that she's not going to be a part of it. And I would say as a couple, for the two of them, figuring out what amount are we okay with her being involved in, right? Maybe we're not okay with her coming to the appointment, but maybe we can let her know that we're going to share the news of how it went or share pictures afterwards, right? Maybe not, right? Like, but you figure out what feels comfortable, what boundary feels comfortable for both of you. You might not 100% agree. And sometimes, especially with these life transitions that you're both figuring out at the same time, you're really just going to lean on whoever like has the tighter boundary, right? So let's say one partner is okay with mother-in-law like getting screenshots of things right away, and the other one wants to wait a few days to decide if they're sharing it or not. Like you're going to be on the more firm boundary in this, right? Like because both of you need to feel safe and comfortable. And these boundaries are okay, right? I think that is something that folks struggle with so much because previous generations might have operated a little bit differently, or they might have different preferences around boundaries or just personal, right? It might not be generationally, but it might be. Maybe they feel like the norm is being super involved in these things. And I think sometimes it's this reality check of like, that's not really the norm anymore. And it's okay that that's not the norm. It's probably not the norm because not everyone's comfortable with it. But sometimes we feel this need to people please of like, oh, well, my mom thinks that that's what people do. And I don't want to hurt her feelings. And in this, it's kind of like, yes, it's great to be intentional about not hurting someone's feelings on purpose. But you get to communicate your boundary. Do so skillfully, do so with kindness. And then it's up to them how they're going to take it in and how they're going to work through it, right? Like they get the option, whether they're going to take it or not, they get the option to sit with it, think on it, go to therapy about it. They get the option to work through what they need to with it. If they are going to take a skillful boundary and take it really personally and get attacky or, whatever is going to show up, like that's on them. And I know that's hard because it's maybe you're not your ideal situation, right? Maybe you want everyone to be happy and understand it and easy breezy. And that's why it's like, okay, we can do the best that we can and communicate these things skillfully with kindness, with compassion. And I don't have to dismiss my boundaries to try to make other people more comfortable. These are one of the situations, right? You're bringing a new little human in the world. Like these boundaries are for you. The goal on where we're prioritizing moments of joy or needs that help you feel more safe or just your own intentions and what you want, like that gets to be on you, right? Like we don't have to provide preference to other extended family members because they're not having the baby, right? You and your husband are having the baby. This is your life transition and you get to choose what boundaries you need for that. You might not make mother-in-law happy. And that's hard. And we can practice radical acceptance of like, this might be messy, right? And if it feels messy, look at it as like, this is an introduction and it's good to start it now. Because as we work on holding boundaries that we need now, it's it's not going to be as new and it's not going to be as hard as when we need to maybe hold boundaries when baby's here. Because most often, right, like if family members are really pushing boundaries during pregnancy and for these things around like how soon they're going to see baby after they're born, or am I going to the delivery room, or am I going to these prenatal appointments, like that usually is like a clue of like, ooh, we might have some big boundary conversations that we need to have once baby's here too. And so look at this as practice. It doesn't have to go well. It doesn't have to feel comfortable. In fact, let's just know that it's not going to feel comfortable. So it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong if it's uncomfy, but it's practice because you're probably going to need to do it a lot more. And on the bright side, right, it might go really well, and it might kind of get mother-in-law on the same page of like checking in on personal needs and all of those things. Maybe, right? Like that's a possibility. And so, yeah, it's overall, I think can be a really great time to check in. What boundaries are we needing? How can we try to communicate those? And I think most of the time it's going to be the person who is initiating and communicating that boundary, especially for the first time or the biggest times, is going to be the partner who is related to that person, right? So their own mom or their own sister or their own uncle or whatever, right? Like they get to do that with their family, and the other partner, you get to uphold it, you get to reinforce it, you get to communicate it as you need to, but the hardest conversations let's leave for the person who is related to them. And if that's feeling really messy, and if you're not feeling on the same page with it and your partner is really not willing to do it, then that is a great moment to be like, oh, we need to work on this because this is an important relationship skill that is also common for people to struggle with. So I'm not saying it's like a red flag, something's bad in your relationship, but it means like, oh, this is something we need to work on. It's a common thing to need to work on, but it could be a great time to seek a couples therapist, to work with someone for support. I'll kind of plug that in if you're like someone in Minnesota going through some similar things. Like I think times around pregnancy or when we're thinking of growing our family or when we just had a little baby can be like these big life transitions where we go through a lot of transformation, right? And we're figuring out a lot of things. We really identify our growing points, the points that we need to work through. So those coming up doesn't mean anything's bad. It's just very normal. Like we're going to hit these like growing pains. And I think therapy can be a really nice time for that. So in the new year, I do have a couple openings either for individuals or couples. I specialize in prenatal mental health. So pregnancy, postpartum, all that jazz. So if you are looking to do some of the work that we're talking about in this episode, head to the link in my bio to learn more about me, schedule a free initial consultation, all that jazz. But yeah, that is today's episode. Communicate those boundaries. You are allowed to have them, and they're allowed to feel uncomfortable. And if you enjoyed this episode or enjoy listening to the Ground to Go podcast, I greatly appreciate a rate and review from wherever you're listening. Share it with your friends who you think would like it too, because that helps me grow my podcast, which is what I'm hoping to do a little bit more. It's a little podcast right now, and I'm hoping to expand its reach a little bit more. So I appreciate those shares. If you can take a couple minutes, that is awesome. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy your new year. If you have a little extra time off work, I hope you can soak in those days. And I will talk to you next week.